this first chapter was an epiphany for me. You know how bad I've dealt with anxiety. I'm on Lexapro today. For me, I realized that voice in my head was what I considered to be anxiety. It was always whispering, what if this happens? What if you're terrible? What if they don't like you? And that what if question became after I read this book, I started talking about this, the other me. Hello and welcome back to the Better Everyday podcast and a very, very special episode.
This is going to be a great episode, John.
I'm pretty excited about it for a couple different reasons. One, if you're listening, you may hear a little something different. If you're watching online, you'll definitely notice we are in a new studio.
We are in my barn.
Yeah.
Which is our new Better Everyday corporate workshop.
And it's amazing. Yeah. When you say barn, don't think like cows and goats. Think like Mercedes and fireplaces.
And bourbon bar.
And bourbon bar, yeah. So we aren't slumming it here in the barn. It is wonderful.
Feels really good.
Yeah. I mean, basically what we're doing with Better Every Day, if you've been listening for a while, you know, we've been doing this for quite some time, and it's evolved. And we are just being more intentional about it than we've ever been.
Well, we're putting a lot of energy into Better Every Day.
Yeah.
Like I said, new studio.
Yeah.
It's going to be fantastic. We're also unveiling that once a month we're going to actually do a deep dive into something that we've read.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about how reading influences our lives.
Yeah.
And this time, or starting now, we're going to dive deep into things that do influence our lives, like particular books. And today we have a fantastic one.
And you just committed us to once a month, by the way. For sure, once a month.
Ish.
That's why my mom still calls this podcast Better Every Now and Then. But we are going to be more consistent than ever. We've got a new production crew. So excited about these guys that care about what we care about. And this book episode, if you've been listening along for a while, you know that our friendship and our evolution of Better Every Day is so driven by these thought leaders who have written.
You know, we talked about this earlier, John. Better Every Day was sort of the outgrowth of us sitting at a cafe.
Yeah.
In downtown Bloomington, you having your big mug of coffee and me having my cappuccino and muffin.
It is a big mug.
And we would sit there and we would talk about things that are impacting our lives.
Yeah.
As we were both trying to grow and then we began growing together.
Yeah.
And that's really pretty much where Better Every Day started.
Yeah.
Fast forward a few years, we're now making a big commitment into Better Every Day, and I'm feeling really good about it.
You know, this book that we're going to talk about today is such a part of that history. I remember sitting at our coffee shop when you suggested this book that we both started. You had already started reading it, like usually happens, and you said you just got to jump into this thing. The book is The Untethered Soul. Written by Michael Singer. And I remember thinking at the time, because I was also going through like this church deconstruction thing, which I'm not even sure if that's what I should call it, but that's the thing people call it.
Yeah.
And so when I heard the word soul, I immediately thought this is like this spiritual book. And I had this reaction to it that now has turned into this just absolute love for the book. And honestly, anybody that I care about, I'm talking about it too, because I think it's so important.
Yeah, all my tennis buddies I play tennis with in the winter down on Longboat Key started giving it to other friends, and they're just consuming it, and then we end up with some great conversations down there. But I think that for me, reading a book, I remember the first time I read The 7 Habits. It didn't strike, it wasn't life-changing for me the first time I read it, and I revisited it at a different parts of my life.
Yeah.
And at some part of my life, it became life-changing. It's not like sometimes you have to be ready.
Yeah.
To sort of consume the content or look at a book with a different set of eyes, or at least ears, right?
Well, part of the commitment that we made to each other with this book review episode that we're going to do every month is research. And if you listen to our podcast often, I wouldn't say we actually go deep into research on a regular basis.
Not on a book particularly, for sure.
So, we've hit this really hard. And
Yeah.
part of it for me was, this is the 4th time I've read this book. And I finished it early this morning, so I crammed a little bit. It hit me different this time than it had the other 3 times.
That's what I mean, yeah.
It's amazing. And I think it's partially because of every time I've read it, I've opened up a little bit more and I see the world a little different. But my kids are older, my business has changed, everything's changed. And so reading it again hit me in a different way.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm super excited. So this book, Untethered Soul, is by a guy named Michael Singer.
yeah.
And, I've read everything. I think I've read just about everything. Well, I have read all the books that Michael
Yeah.
has put out there. But there's just something about this guy who, professor,
Yeah.
lives down outside of Gainesville, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's in what is the name of
Apple. I want to say Appalachian now that you said that.
it?
but that's not what it-
Alachua.
Yes, yeah,
Alachua,
Alachua.
Florida. So, which I think is just a little ways outside of Gainesville.
Yeah.
University of Florida grad. But it seems to me like everything I've read about Michael, and I've never met him,
Yeah.
and I think he goes by Mickey,
Yeah.
which we've talked about him before. Everything I've read about him is he's been sort of a free spirit since he sort of identified that there was a seer inside of his head of the thoughts that he was having.
Yeah. Every now and then you hear about a celebrity, you spend so much time reading or consuming or watching a movie, you feel like you know the person. I feel like if Mickey walked in here right now, I give him a big hug.
For sure.
Even though he doesn't know me, I just feel so connected to him.
Yeah.
And part of it is, just the words untethered soul. If you've never read the book, it won't hit you. But if you've read it, you realize that there is this sense of tetheredness. I know that's not a word, but this sense of like being attached to, a part of us that isn't real.
It's like your soul and your thoughts are the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think, what I've taken from this is the untethering
Yeah.
of those two things and being able to identify that those can be sort of two separate things was profound for me personally.
The other thing I've taken is just the word soul redefined for me. I've always thought of soul in a spiritual context. Mickey doesn't take it out of that necessarily, but he puts a whole much thicker definition around the word soul. And now I think of it as like the person inside the mirror. It's not, the truth is I'm not John Mitchell. That's my name, but there is something deeper. And my soul is that thing that is deeper than my name and the experiences that I have. And I never understood that until probably the second time through this book, and it was an epiphany for me.
Yeah. So Mickey, down out in Alachua,
Yeah.
outside of Gainesville, I think he started teaching for a while, finished his PhD, did some, I wouldn't call them odd jobs, but he had a foray into some contracting,
Yeah.
being a contractor. I think one of the real epiphanies for him was when he went into, I don't remember if it was a Radio Shack or something like that, and saw one of the early, I don't remember if it was a Tandy.
It was a Radio Shack.
Yeah. And he bought this computer, and his brain apparently just sort of worked. The coding worked the way his brain worked, or vice versa. And long story short, as a practicing CPA for a long time, I specialized in medical clients. And back then, everybody was buying this software called Medical Manager. And it was dominating the market across the United States. And I didn't realize at the time that Mickey had created this for a doctor's office somewhere down near Miami, just on a, hey, could you create something for me kind of thing.
Yeah.
And ends up selling it to WebMD and being an executive at WebMD at some point in his life.
Yeah.
In that, what I find really interesting about Mickey is during probably one of his darkest periods of his life, where he's having this, you kind of have to read all of his stuff to really get to know or at least to try to understand who he is. But somewhere during a really dark period where he's struggling with, some issues around the Justice Department.
Yeah.
That, that he was completely exonerated
Yeah,
from,
yeah.
legal issues, that apparently went on for years.
Yeah.
Not days, not weeks, not months, years, right? And you just know the stress of that.
Yeah.
He writes Untethered Soul during the middle of that.
Yeah, that's really good context. You did a good job of reiterating all that. That's
thanks.
a lot of stuff to talk about in his life. If you read this book and then you hear his bio, you think, same guy?
Right.
Because it's so it seems like such a dichotomy in his life. But truthfully, he wrote, after this book, he wrote The Surrender Experiment.
Maybe my favorite, but I think you have to read Untethered
You do.
before you read The Surrender Experiment.
Yeah, you do. But I mean, basically, it's him writing Untethered Soul during this dark time in his life where he's trying to figure all this stuff out and unraveling his brain in a way that he wants his readers to, and then feeling like, okay, I understand this, and then having an experiment, a life where he lives the way he's telling his readers to live.
And it had been for almost his whole adult life.
Yeah. And so there's like this proof feel to that book. Like, I don't know if you ever read a book where you're like, yeah, that sounds good. It sounds pie in the sky. It sounds just idealistic. And you can read this book and feel that way.
Yeah.
But then for him to go on and say, I'm going to prove that this works, and use his life as a lab, it's just been amazing.
I think so too. What the other thing I think that is really interesting for me, and if our listeners want to go see a video of Mickey, he did an interview with Oprah.
Yeah. Oprah loves him.
Yeah. I mean, he's just a guy whose life seems to match up with what he writes about.
Yeah.
And I just think super interesting. So, he's been a business person, run major companies, stayed true to his Alachua roots,
Yeah.
if you will, no pun intended. But it's you can tell that he's still really connected
Yeah.
to sort of himself.
Yeah.
And true to himself is maybe a better way of saying that.
Yeah.
And still just helping people. So being that I'm in Florida a bunch in the winter, and him being up near Gainesville, it is a bit of a drive, but from what I understand, Mickey still does a couple of talks a week.
Yeah.
At the name of his place, I have it here, is
Yeah, he's still got a place.
the Temple of the Universe.
Yeah, Temple of the Universe.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I am. You can. I mean, I've seen pictures. It's a small place.
Yeah.
I just want to go up and
We will be there at some point.
and be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Every now and then you run into somebody in your life. I just had a face flash in front of me that just makes me emotional. But every now and then you run into somebody in your life and you go, this person lives differently. They aren't driven by the same thing that I'm driven by. And they aren't pressured by the same pressure that I feel pressured by. And I think I've never been able to put my finger on why and what it is until this book. That the people that you run into every now and then that don't seem to live life the same way everyone else does have figured out a piece of what Mickey is talking about inside this book. And it's something that I've decided that I want to spend my life, it's part of my better every day personally, is to become more free when it comes to the deepest part of who I am.
So that's a little bit about Mickey.
Yeah.
We're going to dive into the book here, but I think go out and watch that Oprah episode.
Yeah, it's a great way to get to know him.
It's a great way to sort of experience who he is a little bit. I think I would start with Untethered Soul, but if you love it the way we love it, you're going to end up in the Surrender Experiment, and you're going to be like, I can't stop listening to this. So, John, let's kick off and talk a little bit about the book.
Man, I could do a whole podcast on this first chapter. I promise I won't. But this first concept in the first chapter, the way he introduces the entire book, is the concept of your inner voice, which is if there's something inside you as you heard that said, well, that's really stupid, that's your inner voice. Because we all have it. We all have this inner monologue, all of the time going on. And basically this first chapter is just acknowledging that there is this voice inside of your head all of the time going on, and it's not leading you to the life you're looking for.
Sometimes he has a tendency to call it your roommate.
Yeah, he does. He calls it your roommate, your annoying roommate.
Who would hang out with that person?
Yes. So yeah, he says, imagine watching a movie with this inner voice, and the inner voice goes, well, this is a stupid movie. And you just eventually you're just like, get out of my house. But we never kick that inner voice out of our life.
Where I'm at today in my life versus where I was at in my 30s and 40s. I started walking all the time at 40, miles a day. Before that, I was running, so my back didn't hurt as much.
Yeah.
I was running, but I always was, whether I was walking or running, felt like, I don't know why, I had to be thinking about something the entire time. And so there was always this voice going over, do you have enough money in your bank account? How do you get enough money in the bank account? What's right now? I mean, it's just like this constant voice. Or if Michelle and I had an argument, or I was worried about something at the office, I mean, it's like this record would keep playing in my head all the time. And I thought that was me. And I thought it was, I didn't think anything.
Yeah.
It's just what was.
You just
it was just there. Well, I didn't know that you had the ability not to accept
Yeah,
it,
right.
right?
Yeah.
So it would just play.
Yeah.
And man, my moods, everything would just change.
Yeah.
But I think I felt like that voice was supposed to be doing that the entire time. When you do something over and over and over again every single day, it becomes just the way you are.
Yeah.
And you can tell yourself some really shitty things.
Yeah.
Right, in that process.
So true, man. This first chapter was an epiphany for me. You know how bad I've dealt with anxiety. I'm on Lexapro today. For me, I realized that voice in my head was what I considered to be anxiety. It was always whispering, what if this happens? What if you're terrible? What if they don't like you? And that what if question became after I read this book, I started talking about this, the other me. Like I just been describing it like there is another me. There's this pretend thing that I thought was me that isn't. That voice is not me. And it will ruin my business. It will ruin my family. It will ruin my relationships if I let that inner voice drive my life.
So I think, from chapter 1, it's really the concept of this inner voice.
Yeah.
I think if you take nothing else from this, this first section, it's that you can actually see this voice.
Yeah.
Right? And so then the question begs, what or who is seeing that? Mm-hmm. So if you can see yourself having these thoughts nonstop, what is it that's seeing that?
Yeah, I'm the one seeing. I'm the one listening to that voice. That was an epiphany to me. That who am I really? I'm not that voice. I'm the one listening to the voice. I'm deeper than that voice. At one point, he says, this kind of blew my mind at the time. He says, you're not human. You are experiencing life through a human, but you're not a human. You're not a person. There is something deeper in you that is experiencing life through a person.
I think this may have been a different book of his, John, but he talked about we can look in the mirror and we can see ourselves aging, getting older, but the thoughts inside of our head or ourself is not.
That was chapter 2 of this book.
I'm getting ahead of it.
Yeah, that's in this book, and that's him talking about the older you get, the more you're experiencing life through an older human, but you're the same person.
Yeah, just think about that for a second.
I know, it's mind-blowing.
It is. I think the big epiphany for our listeners to take is just see if you can recognize that there's this voice.
Yeah.
Right? And realize that I think untethering starts with recognizing there is this voice.
Yeah.
and then thinking about what is, or who is seeing that, right? I am way better today catching myself when I start hearing that record player. I kind of think of it as a record player.
Yeah.
Same song, different day, right? Going over, no matter what the issue is. I'm better today at recognizing that. And I know we'll get into this in a little bit, but stopping.
Yeah.
And saying, I see that, and that's not helpful. Like letting that go.
Man, I've run hundreds of books in my life, and most of them I don't remember. But there is a part of this book that I think about, and it changed all of my habits every day. I changed my habit every day to get in the shower. You know, he talks about the shower conversations. So one of the places that this inner voice shows up for most people is in the shower. And for me, I realized, he said, take a shower tomorrow morning and pay attention. Don't call it good or bad, just pay attention. And do everything you can to take a shower without those thoughts. And it took me a year to take a shower without thinking all of the awful things that could happen today. And all of the time, all of that time I'm wasting on things that aren't real and aren't true and are being made up in my mind. Begin with my very first task of the day and taking a shower. And it is to this day, I don't take a shower without thinking about that and working hard to quiet that voice.
I don't want to sound like a psychologist or psychiatrist here, but it feels like a lot of the thoughts I would have were sort of reinforced in me when I was young, right? As you're growing up.
Oh, me too.
Doesn't matter. I mean, where I grew up, you know, what your family's like, what church you went to, all this stuff starts creating all this noise inside your head. But you know, as we sort of move into, you know, the chapter 2 or part 2.
Yeah.
I think you can feel when this actually maybe is a slightly different topic, but you know, when something happens to you,
Yeah.
whatever that is, there's something that you see, something, you know, that reminds you of something that brings something up inside of you.
Yeah.
And that voice starts going off. I wonder why they didn't speak to me. Something's wrong with that. I mean, they must be mad at me. Why are they mad? I mean, you know, all this stuff starts happening inside of your head. I mean, just realize that that's hitting something inside of you.
Yeah.
That's triggering that. Does that make sense?
It does. And I mean, that's kind of his transition into this part 2.
Yeah.
This sense of blockages. These things that, so he tells this story, and I definitely don't want, with these book reviews, I don't know how we're going to do this, because I don't want to like create spoilers for people, and I really want people to hear this and read it. So read this anyway, but he gives this illustration about light and dark, and the fact that if you live in a house your whole life and it's always dark in the house, you may do everything you can to produce light inside the house when the light is outside. And he talks about the walls around us, these blockages that keep us from being untethered and being trapped by that inner voice. And man, that started hitting home really quickly with things that I grew up with and blockages that I've had my whole life.
You know, maybe I'm confusing concepts here, but you know, the concept of samskaras?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's like, is that more of an Eastern terminology maybe? But it's like these blockages that you have. And so this thing comes in, whatever the thing is that triggers something.
Yeah.
They didn't speak to me, right? That hits something in you.
Yeah.
And then you start playing that voice over and over again. And that blockage always stays there instead of just kind of like, maybe just letting that go. Maybe they just had a bad day. I mean, just let it go and move on.
It's the biggest challenge of my life, honestly.
Really?
This has been the biggest challenge of my life is to witness somebody else's life and not make it about me. And I don't think of myself as a selfish person, but the world revolves around me when I am too busy and out of control with this inner voice. Because the inner voice likes to always go, how does this affect you? How does this... And the truth is, most of the time, 90% of the time or more, it has nothing to do with
No.
you. And you're making something about you that has nothing to do with you. And that's part of Mickey's conversation around blockages. And when you look at his experiment and the way he lives his life, where people come into his life, man, when you read this book, you're like, oh my gosh, I would sue those people.
Right.
But for the way they treated him with this. And he's just like, all right, and it's not like he just takes things from people, but he allows life to come in and out without this sense of anger.
Yeah, I think, that part that I have taken from him around that concept is, we've developed this own, I don't know, our own self or whatever.
Yeah.
Our own
Ego
and how we want things to be.
Yeah.
And most things that come into our life, we run through our ego filter, right? Oh, I like that, or I don't like that.
Yeah.
What happens if you sort of take your ego out of it a minute and think through what happens if something comes in and you think, well, maybe this is the universe. You can put whatever word you want around that.
Yeah.
But this is something that is happening. Let me take my ego out of this a second.
Yeah.
And let this be.
Yeah.
He, in the surrender experiment, he goes through example after example after example over, 40 or 50 years
Yeah.
of his ego telling him
Yeah.
he should react one way and him surrendering,
Yeah.
and something really big comes out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. The word surrender is where that came from.
Yeah.
That sense of just of letting the moment be. And I think if you take this through his concepts to begin these first two sections, he's got this concept where he's trying to convince people that you aren't the voice in your head, and that the voice in your head isn't on your side. This is not going to lead you to the peace that you want, to the life that you want. Right. And then he basically says there are blockages. There are things that you've built up in your life. One of the things he said that I also think about a lot is that those things that we build up in our life are evolutionary. They're like evolution in our brain that's trying to protect us. So those blockages are keeping us safe, our brain believes. And so we have to choose in those moments, do we want the comfort of treating people the way we've always treated them, of defending ourselves, or do we want the freedom that comes with breaking through some of those things that our brain feels like is protecting us? This is a very science-based conversation. There's something in our brain that evolutionarily is protecting us, or believes it is, and we have to choose over it to go to the things that aren't as comfortable to our brains.
So far, he talks about the art of letting go of those things, and how do we start letting go of those things. But, I think so much of this starts by just being aware. At least for me personally, it's like, oh, I didn't realize that thing in my head was a thing. So this book sort of showed me a number of years ago that this is a thing.
Yeah.
And then as I started realizing the seer, and I could see, gosh, I am thinking these same stupid thoughts over and over. I'm going to stop doing that. My next step was sort of like, God, where's this stuff coming from in me? Is it from bad experiences, my childhood, evolution? Where's it coming from?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of this so far for me personally is just the awareness of what's happening.
So, last week I was with my family in Banff, and my son, Reese, 16, tough guy. He still weighs 120 pounds, dripping wet. So
Don't tell me you got in a fight with a bear or something.
No, he didn't, but he would have if he'd have found one. He's got to let you know he's tough because you can't tell by looking at him, So, but when we got to this place we rented, this lodge, there was a sauna and a cold plunge, and I've never done either in my life.
Okay.
So he's done them before, and he's like, Dad, every night we are going to do both. And I said, why would I want to get hotter than I ever want to be and then colder than I ever want to be? And he said, exactly that reason. And the very first night, he said, this is going to be miserable for you. And the only reason I did it is because this was my son. I would not have done it. And I thought, I'm going to endure it. And then I got in there, and he said, you're not going to make it the whole time. And I thought, I'm going to make it the whole time.
Did you just throw that challenge out here?
He just threw it out there. And so I stayed in this sauna, and there was this moment where he poured more water over the coals, and the whole place filled up, and the thermometer said 140 something or 150 something. And I thought I was going to die. And Reese said, the reason I love this is because it proves to my brain that I'm in charge. I get to choose what I'm doing.
It's pretty solid.
And I thought, oh my gosh, hell yeah.
Let's go.
And we stayed in that sauna. And afterwards, I felt so good. He goes, okay, so now we're going to plunge. And we did the exact opposite, but for the same reason. For the very reason.
Am I going to have a heart attack when I do this?
Yes, you are. No, you're not going to have a heart attack, but you're going to feel like you are. And there is something about your brain going, no, 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 no. And the deepest part of you going, yes, we're okay. I'm okay. And in that moment, we get up out of there, and Reese and I high five. And by the way, I felt like I couldn't believe how great I felt when I got out of there. But it wasn't about that. It was about proving to myself that I can overcome that part of my brain that just wants to be comfortable.
It's interesting because I know Andy and Alex are both doing like cold plunges. This must be a real thing.
It's a real thing, and I think it is. It's Mickey's point that if you just stay comfortable, you will continue to drift into this life that is the easiest thing for your brain, but the hardest thing for your peace.
I think he starts calling this inner freedom.
That's exactly what it is. He refers to it as inner freedom, but he talks about that inner freedom only coming through doing the hard work of getting through those blockages, of sitting in the sauna, of doing the thing that is hard, at the cost of painful conversations and drudging up things, but getting through those in your life.
So just just think about this a second, the opportunity to sort of have inner freedom. I mean, we both know what it's like to, me in a different way than you, but be sort of subject to our thoughts all the time. And, how debilitating probably that's been in a lot of ways for you.
It has been.
But to me, I have a tendency to keep a lot of things in, and it just, it doesn't feel free when you can't let this.
So what does it feel like? What does freedom feel like to you when you are able to silence that inner voice and you are able to get through some of that blockage? What does it feel like?
I think for the most part, I've been able to silence that inner voice, or at least to recognize it when it starts surfacing itself. It feels, quieting my brain feels very free.
Yeah.
I think learning to meditate, we've talked about that before, has produced a lot of, mental freedom, from that voice just constantly going off. Freedom's the only way I can sort of describe having largely turned that off. And I mean, that hasn't been 20 years ago. It's been something less than that. I mean, probably less than, 6 or 7 years ago. And when really shitty things happen in your life, just to be able to turn that off.
Absolutely. That's freedom. For me, I'm not where you are, but I get glimpses. In Banff, I'm walking with Reese on a trail up in the middle of nowhere, and my family is in front of me. Reese and Risha and London are standing in front of me, and I just had this moment of, I guess the word, it's not even freedom, it's connection to my soul, the deepest part of who I am. It's like, oh, this is who I am, not the guy who is on the podcast for Better Every Day. That's not really who I am. And
I thought you were going to say it was because the Bears. You were going to sacrifice them first.
no, yeah, as long as I can run faster than the family, I'm okay, right? No, I think for me, I get glimpses of it, and it, you know, I got up this morning. We have this big production day and this new crew, and these guys are amazing and they're wonderful people. But you always have this moment of like, do I need to impress someone? And when I was standing in the woods in the middle of nowhere, I had this sense that everyone around me accepts me for who I am right now, and I do too. I don't have to be anything more than I am right now. And I think that is the temptation and probably the experience of most people listening to this day. If you don't do this, if you don't work through a process like this, you're probably drifted into something where you are expecting you have to be something more than you are for the people around you to accept you. And to me, that's the better every day in me, personally, is about coming to a place where I can accept myself as I am without having to be any more, so that I can be more and be freer.
You know, a lot of people probably think of the ego as somebody feeling like they're better than somebody else or something.
Yeah.
It's not what we're really referring to when we talk about the ego. We're really talking about just that voice.
Yeah.
Right? That is going off in your head. So the ability to transcend this concept of the ego and to be able to see that for what it is and to be able to shut it off. And it's not just about turning off your brain.
Yeah, no, it's more than that.
It's more than that.
Yeah.
It's letting things come in, as Mickey talks about, and finding those trouble spots and letting them go.
Yeah.
So you can move beyond. It's not about squashing things down and just saying, I'm not going to think about that.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing these things and letting them go. So, you know, I know we've done a pretty quick book review.
Yeah, it's pretty quick.
But the ability to transcend your ego, I think, is life-changing, and certainly is why it's the first book that we've decided to dive deeper into, and something that's changed both of our lives.
Yeah, I think if for no other reason, to be aware of the inner voice, this book is worth reading, listening to. You know, I read it twice physically, and I listened to it twice. Usually I like one or the other better, but I think both are great, and I can't recommend it enough. I think, you know, I think about this, Darren, right now we got people listening who are in their cars on the way to work, probably with an inner dialogue, inner voice right now about today. They've got somebody in their life that they're mad at or is mad at them, and there is a sense of like that conversation with them in their head. And the truth is, I think the most important thing you can do is see it, because you know what Mickey says is that seer is you. And if you can just see it, if you can acknowledge that that's going on, you're that much closer to being untethered.
The idea that you can start recognizing that there's really you in there,
Yeah,
and it's not your voice, I think is super powerful.
it's freeing. Well, that was our first book review episode.
Good job.
I think we'll get better along the way. I did a whole bunch of research. We're going to keep getting better. We'd love to hear from you guys. Love to figure out what you want to hear. We're probably going to do our favorites for a while, and we'll keep them coming every month.
You know, we just set expectations. We're going to continue to do our normal podcast.
Yeah.
And then we're going to add a book review
once a month
on books that have impacted our lives. So
there you go. Hey, thanks to the new crew. Excited to be in the new set and in the new studio here in the barn. And we'll see you guys next time on Better Every Day.